Russia and the Christian West by Joseph de Maistre. Human nature was created for the benefit of the few. This maxim, expressed in natural terms, shocks us, no doubt, by its Machiavellian turn of phrase. But from another point of view, it is well said. Everywhere the mass of the people is led by the few, for without reasonably strong aristocracy, the public authority is weak. There were far fewer free men in antiquity than there were slaves. Athens had 40,000 slaves and 20,000 citizens. Rome, towards the end of the Republic, had about 1,200,000 inhabitants, of whom barely 2,000 were landowners, which by itself proves the enormous number of slaves that there were. One man sometimes had several thousands of slaves in his service. Once 400 slaves were executed in a single house by virtue of the terrible law which pronounced that all the slaves who lived under the same roof should perish when a Roman citizen was killed in his own home. Then the divine law appeared on earth. It immediately took possession of the hearts of men and changed them in a way which arouses the eternal admiration of any sincere observer. Above all, religion began the work unremittingly of the abolition of slavery, a project which no other religion, no other legislator or philosopher had ever dared to undertake, let alone conceive. Generally speaking, human nature is only fit to receive civic liberty in proportion as it is penetrated and led by Christian principles. Wherever any religion other than Christianity is practiced, slavery exists as of right, and wherever religion grows weak, the political power becomes proportionately more dominant, and the nation is less fit to enjoy general liberty. This paramount truth has just been demonstrated before our very eyes in the most illuminating and terrible way. For an entire century, Christianity suffered continuous attack by an abominable sect. Those princes who were perverted by their doctrine allowed them to pursue their work, and on more than one deplorable occasion even helped on their ill intentioned endeavors, undermining, with the very hands that were created to preserve, the pillars of the temple that later crashed around them. What was the result? There was finally too much liberty in the world. The depraved will of men, having cast off all restraint, gave itself up completely to pride and corruption. The mass of emancipated men attacked the first institution in the land that had the greatest influence over all the others. In less than 20 years, the European edifice crumbled, and the principle of sovereignty still struggles to survive amidst the ruins, compromised perhaps forever. In our day, the two anchors of society, religion and slavery, have been lost, so that the vessel of state has been cast adrift and shattered by the storm. These truths are so obvious that it is impossible to question them. It is now an easy matter to apply our conclusions to Russia. If we ask why serfdom is still the common lot of the Russian masses today, the answer is self-evident. Serfdom is present in Russia because it is a necessity and the emperor cannot rule without it. The primordial antipathy between Rome and Constantinople, the crimes and the orgies of the Byzantine Empire, the extraordinary paroxysm which overwhelmed the West round the 10th century, the ill-chosen and consequently the vicious popes who were created at the time by petty, semi-barbaric princes, and even by base women who had seized power, the Tartar invasion, and the previous invasion by a power of another kind, which had entered Russia as a liquid flows into an empty vessel. Finally, the disastrous dividing wall which had been deliberately erected during the 11th and 12th centuries. All these causes, I repeat, removed Russia perforce from the general stream of civilization and emancipation which came from Rome. In the West, the civil authority did not abandon slaves to their own devices when it freed them. They lived under the protection of the priests, and in any case, life at that time was very simple. Science had not yet kindled the pride which, like a devouring flame, has already destroyed a part of the world and will destroy the whole of it if it is allowed to continue. Circumstances in Russia were very different. Every lord, or rather every noble, is a real magistrate, a kind of civil governor who is responsible for the policing of his estate, and who is endowed with the necessary authority to repress, at least to a large extent, the reckless impulses of individual wills. If this magistrate should ever be surpassed, what authority could the sovereign put in its place to maintain order? The laws, you will say. But the laws are precisely the weakest part of this great empire. The tribunals all have more duties to perform than authority to wield. They complain of public opinion, which in turn is dissatisfied with the tribunals. These grievances are one of the things that strike foreigners especially and most forcibly. As a crowning danger, Russia alone, amongst nations, ancient or modern, refuses to exercise the death penalty in the public interest, a circumstance which must be borne in mind. Now, the great conservative and preservative force of loyalty to the throne does not exist in Russia. Religion has a certain influence on the human mind, but none at all on the heart, the seat of all desires and all crimes. A peasant would probably rather risk his life than eat meat on one of the forbidden days. But if the problem is to prevent an outburst of passion, the outcome is uncertain. Christianity does not consist of words only, it is a concrete thing. If it no longer possesses its strength, its penetrating influence, its primeval simplicity, and a powerful priesthood, it is not itself anymore. It is no longer what it was when it made a general liberation of slaves possible. Let the Russian government beware. Its clergy do not even possess a voice in the state. They dare not speak, and are only consulted when it cannot be avoided. A foreigner by no means says, "It is unfortunate." He simply says, "It is a fact." The danger of rebellion following upon an emancipation of the serfs would be indescribably great on account of the peculiar character of this nation, which is the most excitable, impetuous, and enterprising in the whole world. The writer has sometimes said, and I hope the joke is not entirely without foundation, that if the longing in the Russian heart could be imprisoned in a citadel, it would blow it to pieces. No man longs for something as ardently as the Russian does. Watch how he spends his money and how he pursues all his pleasures as the fancy takes him, and you will see how he wants things. Watch him as he engages in trade, even amongst the poorer classes, and see how intelligent and alive he is to his own interests. Watch him as he fulfills his most hazardous enterprises. Watch him finally on the battlefield, and you will see the full extent of his daring. If we imagine liberty being given to 36 millions of men, more or less of this caliber, never can it be repeated too often, we should immediately see the outbreak of a conflagration which would destroy Russia. Russia does not possess any powerful reinforcements to authority, such as Turkey possesses in the Quran or China in the maxims and laws of Confucius. Consequently, she ought to beware of giving full rein to too many individual wills. Moreover, her legislators ought never to lose sight of a fact of the greatest importance. Russian civilization coincided with the period of the greatest corruption the mind of man has ever known, and that a series of circumstances which we cannot examine here put the Russian nature into contact with, and amalgamated it, so to speak, with the nation, which has been at one and the same time the most terrible instrument and the most pitiable victim of this corruption. Such a thing has never been seen before. Priests and oracles have always presided over the infancy of nations. Here we have the opposite. The germs of Russian civilization were fermented and developed in the corruption of the Regency period in France. The dreadful literature of the 18th century arrived in Russia suddenly and without any preparation. The first French lessons which this people received consisted of blasphemies. This fatal disadvantage, which Russia possesses over other nations, ought to make her rulers take special precautions when it comes to the point of giving liberty to the immense mass of the nation which still does not enjoy it. As these serfs receive their liberty, they will find that they are placed between teachers who are more than suspect and priests who are weak and enjoy no special consideration. Exposed in this unprepared fashion, they will infallibly and abruptly pass from superstition to atheism, and from passive obedience to unbridled activity. Liberty will have the same effect on these temperaments as a heady wine on a man who is not used to it. The mere sight of liberty given to others will intoxicate those who still do not share it. With men's minds prepared in this way, any university Pugatchev, footnote, Pugatchev, leader of a peasant revolt in the reign of Catherine II, whom his followers proclaimed to be the murdered Tsar Peter III, executed 1775. End of footnote. Has only to appear. They can be manufactured easily enough, as all the factories are open, and if we add indifference, incapacity, the ambition of a few nobles, foreign bad faith, the intrigues of a detestable sect which never rests, etc., etc., the state, according to all the rules of probability, will literally burst asunder like an overlong beam which only holds firm at the two extremities. Elsewhere, there is only one danger to fear. Here, there are two. If an emancipation of the serfs is to take place in Russia, it will come about in the course of nature. Quite unforeseen circumstances will make it generally desirable. The whole process will take place quietly and will be carried through without a hitch, like all great enterprises. If the sovereign gives his blessing to this national movement, it will be his right and his duty to do so. But God forbid that he should ever stimulate it of his own accord.